In this presentation, we will record the completion of a job and the invoicing of that job within QuickBooks Pro, QuickBooks Desktop. Here we are in our third practice problem. We currently have the open windows open. You could open the open windows by selecting the view dropdown and the open windows list. We're going to first consider this by looking at our Excel sheet. We're in tab 1.31, so 1.31. We're taking a look at this transaction, and this transaction will be related to the job that has been closed, that being job number 14. So in other words, if we go over to job number 14 in our job cost sheet, we're going to say that it is now closed, so it's no longer open. So I'm going to say it's not open anymore. It's now closed. So I'll keep it yellow there. It's now closed, indicated by these blue items here. So that means that this job that cost the $191, $140 in total cost has now closed. Now, when we close it out under the system we have here, note it's already been recorded to cost of goods sold. We've been recording that to cost of goods sold as we've been recording the cost of the job. So therefore, what we have to do now is record the sales side of things. And the sales side of things, we're going to say there's a 30% markup. So we're going to take that 191, 140 times 0.3 plus the 191, 140, and that's going to be the sales price, the 248, 482. So all we're going to do then over here is we are going to say that the accounts receivable will be going up by the 248, 482, and then the sales will be going up. Recorded this way, accounts receivable then increasing, and the sales or revenue increasing like so. Now, note again, we don't have to do the second half of the journal entry that we would have to do as we did in the first example problem, where we had everything going through work in process, then to finished goods, then to cost of goods sold. There's a timing difference between those methods here, because here we've already been recording the cost of goods sold and now recording the revenue side on the income statement. So there's a timing difference between those two activities. So this is the first half of the transaction we have to record. We'll have to do this in QuickBooks on the general ledger side. Then on the jobs side, we need to indicate in some way that the job has now been closed, so that when we process the job, we can tie out the job cost sheets to the jobs that had been opened during the time period. In this case, if I was to say these are all the jobs that had been opened during the time period, and then this is going to be the amount on the cost of goods sold, the difference being that $83,000. We need to be able to reflect that in some way on our job reports as well to be able to tie in, reconcile the job reports. Let's do that now. We're going to go to the QuickBooks then, and we're going to record an invoice. So we're going to record the invoice. Now there's two different ways that we could see this invoice. So I'm going to say that job 14 has been closed. We're going to type in job number 14 here. One way is that it could say, hey, do you want us to pull up the information you set up with the estimate? So if I was to do this, we're going to delete this. We're not going to do it this way, but just note if I was to say okay, then it's going to give us the information for the estimate. I'm going to close this one out for now. I'm not going to use this for now. We're not going to process this invoice. We're just going to look at it. And notice this is what we put in the original estimate number when we started out. So to see that, let's go to the Home tab. Let's go to the Estimates. And then I'm going to go back to estimate number for job number 14, which is this item here. So we put in these estimates. I should have marked up these top three, but in any case, we put in this estimate. That's the 109,600. 209,600 is the total amount. Now this estimate is pulling through to the invoice. It's pulling through to the invoice as we can see here, and then we would be billing for that amount. Now, this would mean that this would be a good method if nothing else changed. If we said, hey, this is the estimate, and that's what we're going to pull over for the invoice, and that is what it is. But if there's some kind of leeway within the job, we say, hey, this is the estimate, but we're actually going to charge you on actual costs and mark it up in some way, then we would need to use the other method, which we will see now. So I'm going to close this out. I'm not going to record it. Don't record it. Then I'm going to go back to the Home tab. We're going to create an invoice. And for job number 14, once again, recreating it, but not use the estimate, closing that out. Instead, using this item, which is to select the outstanding billable time and costs. So we're going to use that. We're going to say OK. Then I'm going to select the 18 items here. I'm going to select them all and then say OK. So now our invoice is populating by all the items we charged to it and called it a billable item. For example, I'm going to close the estimate. I'm going to go here. I'm going to close the estimate. If I go back to the home page and we were to choose a check and we went back to a prior check, all the items that said they were billable are now showing up as billable to that particular customer. So that's what we want. I'm going to close that back out and I'm going to go back to the invoice. So that looks good, and now we have all the detail that we had in there because we set up the items in such a way that we have more detail within it. So we have all this more detail in the item. If we then go to, we want to check this off to the report now. So if I go to the reports drop down, if I go to the jobs report, we want to go to the job estimate versus the actual. I'm going to go to job number 14 and look at the detailed report and say okay. And then if we scroll down, you want the full date because we want the full report throughout the full lifetime. So I'm not going to limit the report to like the current period because some of the activity happened in a prior period. We're concentrating here on the actual cost, which is at the 191,140. You want to be able to double check that in case there's any kind of problem, but it should tie out. If there's something that, for example, wasn't billable, we forgot to click the billable item, then these two things might not match out, and all you would do is make an adjustment here because this would be the proper number you would think, the 191,140. If we go back to our invoice now, we see the 191,140 here. That looks good. Again, we have all the detail here. Now we're going to mark it up by that 30%, and that's going to be our markup. So I'm going to add a new item here, which is going to be the markup. We're going to call it markup. And I'm going to keep it as a service item. The other side of the account is going to go to income. That's all we need. Doesn't need to be double-sided or anything like that. We're going to say okay. And then for the markup, it's going to be equal to the amount currently, 191,140 times 0.3, 30% of it. And that will increase it to that 248,482. That's the amount that we recorded on our trial balance here in Excel, 248,482, 248,482. So that's going to be our invoice. We also want to change the date, however, to be 12, let's make it 01/31/20. So what's this invoice going to do? It's going to increase the accounts receivable by the 248,482. The other side is going to be going to revenue, or as we set it up, income. What it's not going to be doing is recording anything to cost of goods sold. We've already recorded to cost of goods sold as we've been entering the data. So we're going to say save and close and check it out. So I'll say yes. Actually, I'm going to close this back out. We got to uncheck the print and the email later, and then we're going to go to save and close and yes. Okay, so there we have that, closing this back out. And then if I open up our trial balance, if I go to the reports drop down, we go to the accounting and taxes and take a look at the trial balance. Then we'll change the dates from 01/01/20 to 12/31/20. There is our trial balance, and we've got the income now at the 248,482. So if I double click on that and we scroll down, that's going to give us all the items, giving us all the detail. So it's all for job number 14, you can see. It's one invoice, job number 14. Double clicking on any of those, we get back to our invoice. Closing this back out, the other side being in accounts receivable. Double clicking on the accounts receivable, there's our accounts receivable invoice. Double clicking on that, there's our invoice. Closing this back out, let's take a look at the profit and loss report. Reports drop down. We're going to go to the company and financial profit and loss report. And we're going to change the dates from 01/01/20 to 12/31/20. And there we have it. So we have the income up top that has been recorded. We already had the expenses. So we have more expenses. We have the expenses for the jobs that have been closed and those that have not been closed in cost of goods sold at this point. Now let's take a look at the jobs summary report. So if I go to the reports drop down and we go to the jobs report and we go to the job summary, estimates versus actual summary, then we have our costs here at the 757 still. That if we tie that out to here, that adds up to all of our open jobs that we've had over the period. So that adds up to the open jobs that we've had over the time period. And we need to indicate in some way that this job number 14 is closed but I'd like to also indicate that it had been opened during the current time period. So it was still open during the current time period. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the name to 14 and I'm going to change it to closed, but I'm going to not change the status until the end of the year. And at the end of the year, I'd go back and change the status. So what would that look like? Then if we went up to the customer, we want to go to the customer center. I'm going to go to job number 14, and I'm just going to indicate in the title that it is closed. And I'm not going to change the status yet. I'm going to keep the status as is, and then at the end of the year, I'll change the status to closed after it's been closed out. So any job that was open at any point in time throughout the time period that we're looking at, I'm going to keep as the status of in progress, label it as closed when it has been closed. And then I'm going to say OK. And then if I go back to the job report, I'm going to say, click this and say yes. And there we have it. Now it says closed here. So that's going to indicate to us, of course, the jobs that have been completed here. This one has been completed and is now closed versus the items that are still open. And that'll help us to do an adjusting entry if we need to do an adjusting entry at the end of the time period. If we want to take these open jobs and adjust them at the end of the time period, that'll help us to do that. And then once the period is closed, then I would go back in here and say I want to take all jobs that were closed during this current period. So at the end of December, all the jobs that were closed as of the current period, I would label them as closed. So if I go back in here, then we could go to the status and say that I want the status to be closed. And that gives us the filtering option. So if I say OK, and then go back to our report, then we can filter by that. I can say, okay, I want to go to the customized reports, and I just want to go to the filter, and I just want to see the report type of the reports that are currently open, right? And I want to see the job status, and I'm going to say I only want the ones that are in progress. Now, I'd like to see the ones that are in progress for the entire period, that were in progress at any point during the period that I'm in. But in this case, I'm going to say okay, and that would filter. So that would be useful for the filtering option. Again, I would wait to do that until basically the end of the year so that you could filter out basically all jobs that weren't open at all during the current year versus the jobs that were open during the current years, and then indicate the ones that are closed with the closed item. And if you want to remove the filter, customize job up here, you can then go to the filters and then select the job status and then remove the filter and OK. So I would go back. I'm going to go back to the customer job, double click on it, and then go to the job info, and I'm going to keep it as open. And you could use a third term too. You could say, well, this is pending or something to indicate basically it's been closed, but it was open during the time period. You could use a third category to help your filtering options as well. But I'm going to keep it in progress now. Say, okay, there's that. And so we're back to this report. And again, the point of that is that we want to be able to reconcile what is on the cost of goods sold account to what's in the jobs report here. So if we wanted to go back to the profit and loss report, for example, and do our adjusting entry to reflect the fact that some of these items for the two jobs that haven't been closed and put that into work in process, then we can do that adjusting entry periodically. And if we do that adjusting entry periodically, this system might be easy to do in some ways, to record everything in this format and just realize that there's an adjusting entry that needs to be done on a periodic system, or possibly at year end or something like that. So the process for the adjusting entry would be just the same as it was in the prior problem. So we won't actually have another presentation on it. Just note it's on the final tab in the Excel worksheet 1.31. And then if we enter this adjusting entry just like we did with the prior problem, then we can basically take us back to more of a accrual type method, whereas the jobs that aren't completed, then we can pull into work in process, only reflect the jobs that have been completed in the cost of goods sold. Then if we take a look at our sales versus our cost of goods sold, we're only reconciling or calculating or comparing the sales price to job 14 in this case and the cost of goods sold. Everything else is still in work in process. Now, note there's other variations you can do on this because obviously you could be invoicing as you go through the project depending on how long the project is. So just realize that you can, whatever system you have, you want to be able to reconcile the job cost sheet to the books in some way, either with being able to reconcile the cost of goods sold or the work in process and the finished goods account. And then at the end of the period, whatever adjustment you need for taxes, for to be able to review the books, or for, if you need a loan or something like that, if you need to be on completed contract, or if you needed bonds or whatever you need the adjustment to do, as long as you can reconcile out the books, then between the job cost sheets and the books, then it should be possible. You should be able to take those numbers and do whatever type of adjustments are needed for whoever needs them in whatever format they want to see them in.